Welcome to those that have joined. Like I said, in terms of some kind of housekeeping rules, Tessa said absolutely fine to have videos on, but like I said, please keep mics muted. We will be doing the like a Q&A at the end. So I think Tessa's talk is around half an hour, so we'll keep kind of questions to the end. If you do have any questions during, feel free to pop them in the chat. But yeah, that'll be kind of monitored at the end by myself and Tess. But yeah, feel free to use the chat as we go along. Yeah, so I'll do a bit of an intro into the actual meetup. So welcome to those that are new and those that are returners as well. For those that are returners, obviously, yes, it's Bristol Cloud Native DevOps meetup. I'm showing you all about it. For the new people, we run these on a monthly basis. They vary from topic to topic. It could be an individual speaker like Tess, or we've had panel events. We've had some lightning talks. So a bit of a variety, to be honest. Yeah, run about everything and anything kind of DevOps and cloud native. So yeah, we've had some really interesting talks, and like I said, I'm sure today's will be equally as topical and as exciting as kind of previous ones. What I'll do is a bit of a kind of introduction. So Tess is going to be doing a talk today. Like I said, going to last about 30 minutes. Tess is a senior engineer at Maytech, who is essentially a kind of a consulting firm. I'll let Tess do a little bit more of an intro about that. So yeah, if like I said, any questions, please use the chat. Otherwise, Tess, I will kind of hand over to you, and then we'll get kick started.
Fantastic. So please give me a cheer, thumbs up or boo, depending on whether you see a starter slide saying cloud versus COVID. I'm getting a thumbs up. Excellent, loads of thumbs ups. Hey, and Andy, nice to see you on your video as well. Okay, right. I promise I won't actually haul anybody else out by name. I'm not interested in hazing. So, firstly, thank you for giving up some of your lunch times or day to listen to this talk and to get involved. I don't normally like giving webinar lecture kind of things, so it's nice to talk at a meetup where we can have a little bit of interaction and Q&A at the end as well. As we said, I work for Maytech. I work out of the Bristol office nominally, but I'm working from home from Herefordshire most of the time at the moment. And one of the things in my experience over the years has been getting into DevOps and getting into the nitty-gritty of networking and VPN in this case. So a little bit about me. I've been in tech for about 20 years, and some of that has been from front-end engineering and photography right the way through to DevOps and networking and managing Active Directory and all that good stuff. I joined Maytech to work with public sector and consultancy, and I'm finding that really interesting and enjoyable. It's quite a different sector to work in. But as we'll see, they share a lot of situations and scenarios. Public sector and private sector all face the same challenges with having a secure VPN and making sure that you can do things remotely in a good way. So we'll talk about a couple of example contexts. Experiences will vary across different companies, so it's worth having a couple of scenarios to kind of hook our thoughts onto. I'll talk about what we want to consider when we're looking at VPN and the remote world in general. We'll summarize a little bit. So it can get quite wide in the kind of scenarios and options we'll look at. So have a summary just so we can get our heads around it. And then I'm going to open the floor to questions, have a bit of a bonus chat. Feel free to school me on things you know more about. I love having new learning experiences every day. It's a school day. So let's have a look at some of the example contexts. So the first one, I'm not going to name names here, they're example contexts. So in the before times, in the good old days, we had strictly in-person onboarding for this scenario. So you had to be connected to an office network. That's something that we got very used to. So when you first set up your password, you had to be connected to the office network. It expired the first time you used it. You set it again, it's all good. Part of your onboarding pack was your temporary password. So in this scenario, we've got maybe 800 people working for the organization, but less than 25% ever work from home or work in any other location, and probably not all week, so maybe a couple of days a week, 40% of the time. The setup for VPN for this organization was very naive cloud use, so infrastructure as a service, using instances in AWS to host OpenVPN. Most of the reason why this scenario has VPN access is to make sure that for on-prem services and for internal cloud environments, dev environments, all that good stuff, you have to be on the VPN to access it. So it's your frontline security kind of idea. So everyone's happy, it's all nice and secure. But March 2020 comes along and lockdown started. Luckily, there were quite a few companies that actually ran chaos events to figure out what to do before it actually happened, which is a bit of a relief. But we're in a situation of clunky onboarding. So you can't be connected to an office network when you're onboarding. That's a bit of a problem. And we also have 700, 800 people working remotely. And they're working remotely all week. That's a big scale. So although we're still using a naive cloud use, we're still using infrastructure as a service, we've scaled up. So 3 servers turn into 9 servers, that kind of thing. And they've got a very clear idea of how many connected users they want to have per server. And hold that in your thought, because we'll come back to that later. Again, we're protecting on-premises services and internal cloud environments. It's all nice and secure, everybody's happy. Except when you're onboarding. So what's the problem with onboarding? And the problem with onboarding is this office networking thing. So you can't set up your password in a way that won't expire. And you can't connect to the VPN to connect to the network to reset your password. And all the documentation to understand how to connect to the VPN is behind the VPN. So this is why I'm using the word deadlock. So it's a bit of a clunky scenario, but there is a way around it. There is a smoother automated process flow. And in this scenario, this company actually went the extra steps to work out that all of the documentation can be sent out by email. You don't have to be on a VPN to get it. Your password is sent to you securely, and it has an expiry that works so that you can connect to the VPN and reset it. So that's a big win. And it's made onboarding in general a lot smoother, even when you're going into the office. So that's a big win. Everybody's happy. So what was next? And when I first gave this talk, next was June 2020. And we were talking about the idea of maybe starting to go back into the offices then. I know we can laugh now looking back, but this was a real consideration. So we're talking about people being flexibly remote. We were talking about anyone up to the 800 could possibly be online. They might be in 1 day a week. They might be 100% working from home. Nobody knows, basically. My favorite QI screen. Actually, right now, what's happening? So for this scenario, we're kind of back to the office, sort of. So we do have 100 people, sorry, 100% of people, actual fully remote. And they're in the office maybe 3 days a week. And that sounds great. And it sounds very predictable, because it sounds like everyone's going to be in the office and the office is going to be closed 2 days a week. That's not really what's happening. People are going back in as teams. So you still got a load of people working from home on 1 day, and then they're in the office the next day. So it's a little bit less predictable. So the situation here is, and the key consideration is, we have a good fixed solution, but we want to consider whether or not to scale it back. And we want to consider maybe moving to something more flexible, but we've got 800 people to migrate. Some of these people are not tech savvy. So it's interesting support conundrum at the best of times, but moving them onto a different system is a real concern. So that's the trade-off that's being considered there. So that's one possible scenario. So another possible scenario, again, not a real company, but it's inspired by experiences. In the before times, strictly in-person onboarding. Rarely remote. So you got 50 people in the organization, much smaller, but they're always connected to an office network somewhere along the line, so it's fine. Maybe 10% of the time people are remote. That's not a problem. It's all nice and secure. Everybody's happy. For this scenario, this organization had quite a few services in the cloud. They had quite a few services that were software as a service. So they're already using Miro and GitHub from a cloud perspective with two-factor authentication. And they're not thinking about securing so many things behind a VPN. So the onboarding wasn't too bad. You know, they didn't have to make many changes to it. And once lockdown had started, that was it, 50 people working from home fully, no questions. The transition was quite smooth. And part of the reason for that was their VPN solution was a native solution, and it used a trusted authenticator. So it's fully delegated responsibility outside of that organization to do most of the ops work for it. Happy, nice and secure, everybody's okay. So what it was considered to be like in June is actually probably what it's like now as well. It's a company that's seen huge growth. So suddenly 250 people being considered. But it's still not 800, 1,000 people. It's still kind of more medium size and still 100% of the time working online, but remotely from various locations. So for this solution, this situation, a native solution with this trusted authenticator, and making sure that what we care about in security is actually also dealt with by authentication and authorization in a really solid way. Software as a service, really locked down. That's where the focus has been for this particular scenario. So, two possible, very, very different situations. So let's have a look at some of the things that we'd consider when we're looking at VPN options, whether you've got one now or whether you're starting from scratch. Is it flexible or is it fixed? Is there a fixed number of servers that are used or not used? Or is it going to scale up and scale down on demand? So when you're thinking about that choice, we're thinking about how changeable is your user behavior? How much can you predict how many people are going to be in the office or working from home at any one time? If you've already got a VPN solution, how long have you prepaid it for? Have you got reserved instances somewhere that you've spent 3 years worth of money on that you actually want to continue using because you've already paid for them? And there's also the question of how much is just raw cost the real concern to your organization. So is resiliency of a real focus? Is the fact that you have or haven't got a dedicated DevOps team in your organization a consideration? So there's lots of things around that. You might not be in a situation where you're worrying about scaling back down because you trust the situation you've got right now and you've got all the things in place to look after it. The next question is, do you manage it yourself or do you get a provider to manage it? And I've specifically left the word provider very vague there purposefully for now. So when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about how many users you've actually got. So how big is the user base? What kind of traffic levels are you talking about? What do you have ops staff? Do you have DevOps staff? Do you have system administrators? What are they comfortable with supporting? Do you not have that function at all in your organization? Do you outsource it? Or do you have people who know how to use the cloud well, but it's not their full-time role? what's your strategy if you're going to self-manage for maintenance and patching and monitoring and automation and all of those wonderful things that come with DevOps that, you know, I enjoy getting into the nitty-gritty of. And there's also a consideration that some organizations have got a very custom setup. They have very specific mobile or tablet requirements. They have very specific certificate requirements, access to particular data centers. Lots of things play into this situation. And then there's the standard cost versus usage. I did some figures on this a little while ago for AWS and for Azure, and looking at a self-managed service versus a fully managed native service on some basic assumptions, and those assumptions are around scenario 1. Then if you've got around 350-ish users, going for a fixed solution that's self-managed might work out cheaper from a cost value point of view. For AWS, Azure's fairly similar, 300-ish users. And I haven't looked deeply into Google for this because I don't work directly with Google, but I know they have equivalent services. But there are some serious complexities in the way that these are costed. So self-managed costing is one way of looking at the cost. Native services are costed in particular ways, and they do vary from provider to provider. So data egress is dealt with differently, load capacity units, how you understand what it costs to have a team that supports a self-managed service. That's your organization's decision, how you measure that. Whether you pay for annual licenses for your VPN service, have you paid for that as a bundle? Have you paid for it up front? Is it on demand? How many connections do you want to support per server? If you want to have smaller servers that only do 140 people, but you need 9 of them, what's the trade-off with supporting 3 of those that can support many more connections? But if you have one zone go down, that's a lot of people on one server that are suddenly having a bad day. How much do you segregate your internal services? If you're using your VPN to secure your internal services and they're on a network of some kind, it doesn't matter whether it's data center or whether it's some cloud provider, you're going to have the equivalent of subnets. And if you've split your services by various subnets and kept them very segregated, but your VPN needs to give you access to all of them, the more of those you've got has a cost impact as well. Because a lot of native services are cost on demand, if you have that wonderful person who always leaves their tunnel connected overnight, that's going to be a consideration as well. I'm not going to name any names on that, but I know I've left mine on overnight as well. So there are 3 kind of options we can explore in a little bit more depth. And apologies for those who don't like looking at technical stuff. There's a little bit of technical stuff in here as well. So first situation, fully managed situation, cloud native or provider native, certainly. It can cost more. So if you have users connected 24 hours a day because you've got 24 hours support lines, you're moving a lot of data, it can be quite expensive. It does lock you into a vendor more than just for the licensing, but it does flex quite nicely. If you have times where you have intermittent lockdowns or you're closing the office for some reason, then that can scale back and it can scale back up again, and it's all on demand. You don't have the problem of transferring licenses. So in a self-managed situation, instances that get recycled overnight, the licensing does need to be managed somehow. You don't have to patch any software. You don't have to consider security, vulnerability patching, zero-day patching, things like that. You've got high availability, you've got multiple zones. I'm not sure how that works with AWS if London is underwater, but certainly with all the cloud providers, they have resilience built in. What I would say is when you're choosing a provider, check that they can handle the config types that you're using. If you're using a lot of mobile devices, if you have particular certificates, if you're using a Windows authentication method rather than OpenVPN, something like that, check that it's going to be compatible, because we want any migration from an existing system to a cloud system to be as smooth as possible. So I work in Terraform. I do most of my provisioning in Terraform. So looking at the resources that you could have for an AWS native solution, this is the kind of things we're talking about. We have associations with networks, we have the VPN endpoint itself, security groups to keep everything nice and secure. If you have trusted networks you want to include and exclude everyone else, that's important. You've got authorization rules to see who can go where, and some log groups and log streams and things to support networking and monitoring, and TLS certificates, client certificates. Amazon Certificate Manager integration is out of the box for this. And you can have client VPN routes and some kind of proxy networking to talk to your various internal services. So it feels like quite a lot, but they're very specific resources. Semi-managed only really applies to Amazon Web Services. And that's because they provide bundled license service for OpenVPN. So if you're going down the OpenVPN route, then they do this interesting hybrid kind of situation. So you do have to have ops expertise. It is an infrastructure as a service based solution rather than a native solution, but there isn't any license management. And the auto scaling options, like any auto scaling group, the scale of it, the scale back, any self-healing or anything like that is going to work the same way as it would with a self-managed service. And it can be cheaper than fully managed, depending on how granular you have it. If you have 50 user blocks for the license, so 50 users on an instance, you're going to pay the same as the fully managed. Easter egg in this is, I have the sneaky suspicion that's what they do under the hood. They actually use those blocks to provide the managed service. So this looks very like a different set of resources. And if you've ever run virtual machines in Amazon, this is going to be familiar to you. You've got an auto scaling group, a launch configuration, which means that it knows how to spin up these various machines. You've got any additional resources. So anything that you want to put in for self-healing or scaling up or scaling back, those are going to be the same for any other kind of virtual machines. We've got the AWS instance, which is the actual machines themselves. And the key thing is that these get run with the Amazon provided Amazon machine image, which contains the license bundle. So this is why you don't have to do the license management and you don't have to do the patching, because that contains all the software that you need for this OpenVPN solution. Security groups the same. We've got elastic IPs and DNS records to make sure that people can actually access these servers, which aren't necessary for the fully managed service. TLS certificates, client certificates, the same, but you can use your own management on that. And monitoring becomes a bit more difficult. This is a subject we can dive into in more detail if people are interested. But to get monitoring on these services as an OpenVPN solution, there's an admin function. You need to be able to harden that for yourself, and you need to be able to configure that for yourself. It does take the extra bit of expertise to do that. I wouldn't ever say you should have this open to the outside world so that any person can come along and disconnect one of your clients or restart the whole box. That seems a very, very bad thing to put out in the real open world. And traffic routes in a similar kind of way. So if you've got your own ops team and your DevOps folks really know their stuff, then you can go self-managed. That's a perfectly legitimate option. It does need ops expertise. It does need an idea of where are the vulnerabilities, how often do we patch them, how often do we roll out and recycle, that kind of stuff. It does need some way of handling license management. So depending on what infrastructure as a service you're going for and how often it gets recycled, that's going to have an impact on that. If there are zone outages, and I've lived through a few, if you're not in all 3 zones for AWS, for instance, moving to another zone can be a pain. Scaling up and down within zones or scaling across because one zone's gone down, it's worth chaos testing that just to get that process smooth. It can be really good for fixed scenarios if you know that you have a certain number of people and they're always going to be remote and they're always going to be a reasonably fixed number of people, you're not scaling your business, and it's more than 350-ish, depending on your config, it can be a really good solution for you. And it can be cheaper. And it does lock you into where you'll get your licenses from, but it doesn't lock you in necessarily as hard into a particular provider. So data center, you could use your own data center, things like that. The thing with the self-managed service is you're not limited to just the big 3. You can also go into OpenStack. If you're in a not-for-profit situation, you can look at Open Nebula. There's a lot more options for controlling your infrastructure in a self-managed service. So you could, in theory, hop between providers and take your well-managed virtual machine images with you effectively, or at least with a little, less migration on that, as long as you've got the expertise. So in an AWS world, we've got an auto-scaling group and a launch configuration, the same to control the machines. Any self-healing that you want to apply to this. The instance here, the machine image that you're going to use is going to be cranked for yourself. You're going to be patching it, you're going to be designing it, you're going to be patching the operating system on it for yourself. That's entirely up to you to organize in the way that you do, because if you have got the expertise, this is already your bread and butter. Security groups, DNS, all the rest of it the same, certificates the same. Your monitoring situation is, again, the same sort of thing. You're going to be rolling your own. And certain admin functions will be available as plugins, but again, you'll want to harden that. And we can dig into that a little bit deeper if people are interested. And again, all your routes, pushing your routes, your configs, your proxies, all that's going to be the same as the semi-managed service. So we talked a little bit about the options, but there's quite a few people that you can work with here. You can work with the existing data center. If you're in a situation where you can't go for public cloud, for whatever reason, defense, particular parts of government, you can be working out of a data center. So you could be using OpenStack anywhere. You could be using your own infrastructure as code setup. But if you want to be looking at clouds and looking at cloud native, there are, obviously there's a big 3, but there are other options as well. Gartner rated Perimeter 81 as a supplier in 2020 that provided a cloud VPN server and client solution. For OpenVPN as a technology, a framework, if you like, apart from the big 3, DigitalOcean do hosted OpenVPN. Oracle do, a number of other providers may do as well. And then we're looking at managed services, obviously. Client VPN is the one from Amazon, VPN Gateway is the one from Azure, Cloud VPN, the one from Google, they're all native solutions. They pretty much do the same sort of thing. They take the same considerations into account when they're talking about cost. So data usage, how many users you've got, how you generate your certificates, all that kind of thing are all things that they take into account. And OpenVPN Cloud. So OpenVPN as an organization actually provide a cloud, paid for cloud service as well. So that's an additional option if you don't actually like the big 3, and that's a reasonable thing too. I've added this last note as a bit of a tongue-in-cheek because it has come up in conversation. You know, when AWS in London has a bad day, everybody starts getting out the, we must be multi-cloud kind of thing. And there are consultants out there that will handle multi-cloud for any kind of technology, but for VPN in particular. I think this is not necessarily something you want to spend a lot of money on if you're a small organization. It's aimed at big enterprises. So people like Splunk themselves, who run massive servers and have a much bigger consideration, they use a multi-cloud consultant, according to the consultant's website. Take from that what you will. So there's a lot of options there, and you can always crack your own if you feel that's the way you want to go. So summarizing, this is the classic consultant answer. It depends, but it really does depend. As we looked at the two scenarios, the examples we looked at, they're very, very different situations. And the size of your company, the makeup of your company, it all plays into this, how you get your staff remote in a big, big way. So these are the questions that I tend to think about when I'm thinking about VPN solutions. And your answers to these will help you kind of understand what situation you're in, whether you're in one or two or something completely different. So why do you want a VPN? What is it you're trying to protect here? You're protecting internal services, you're protecting your staff on the road, connecting to random Wi-Fi's on the train, any traffic that's going past. Are you doing site-to-site tunnels, that kind of stuff? Why are you doing this? Why are you changing? Are you happy with the solution you've got? Or do you need more flexibility? Are you seeing that you need to flex up and down? Are you just scaling out? Are you just scaling back? How big is your company and how tech savvy is it? Are you going to be spending, if you're in a DevOps team and an IT support team, you're spending most of your time on the phone to people, trying to get them to understand how to connect to your new native solution. Is that a factor that you're wanting to factor in? And who already does this stuff? I mean, DevOps for a lot of us in tech is bread and butter. That's why we go to work. But there are a lot of organizations out there that just don't have a dedicated team for this sort of stuff. They might have people who care about it and have the skills to do it, but they also have a million other things to do. And if you take VPN out of the equation, they suddenly have all their time freed up for more custom business-focused DevOps. If you're already using a cloud provider and you may or may not be using native services with them, do you want to look at their service as a priority? So if you're already locked into AWS, it's not a big step to go for Client VPN. If you're already a big Google customer and you're really happy with their offering, then Cloud VPN might be your way forward. And a key question is when as well. So for many people, scaling up was a panic thing, but scaling back down is maybe a more measured approach. So we might be in a situation where everybody's refused to go back in the office and we have to be 100% remote. Or we might be in we're comfortable with a hybrid situation and we can guess that about 50% of people will be there. Or we can't guess at all. Please take this complexity away from me and give me on-demand pricing. Because I can get my head around that, but I can't get my head around scaling up and down and patching and messing about because I have better things to think about. That might be a scenario you're in. And if you've already paid for licenses or you've already paid for instances, you might want to say, I'm going to migrate after I've considered that, or I'm going to migrate at a time when I'm having a lot of staff change. So there might be a gradual handover. There might be a parallel run for a bit while you get people migrated over. So there's a lot to unpack and think about in there. So this is a very general consultant view. This next slide, I will say, is probably the closest to my personal opinion you'll get. Do you go native or do you go home? And if you're in a small organization and you don't have a dedicated DevOps team, or your DevOps staff are looking after something that's business related, that brings money in directly, consider starting native, consider migrating to a native solution. Scenario 2 is in exactly that space. If you've got wider ranging concerns than just thinking about your IT, why worry? These guys, the providers, invest a lot of manpower and intelligence and money, quite frankly, at getting these things working well. But whatever you decide, and this is really my personal soapbox, please tell me you're using infrastructure as code. It doesn't matter whether it's Terraform or CloudFormation or Azure resource management, wonderful files. If it's versioned and it's in code, you're safe. So I really hope that all of us out there are considering that. So thank you very much for listening to all that. I have no idea whether I'm anywhere near 30, but I haven't been interrupted to be given a 5-minute warning. So I'm assuming we're kind of okay. I'm going to hand it over to you guys. What do you want to ask about? What do you want to explore more?
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Tess. I think really, really interesting. Excuse me. So yeah, if anyone's got any questions, please do use the chat function now just to pop anything in there. One question I did actually have, Tess, is you mentioned at the end that if you were going to migrate, potentially it might be a good time to do it around, you know, any kind of staff changes or anything like that. I mean, how complex is actually a migration from, you know, one of the big three, should we say, to another one of the big three, say like Amazon to Azure, for instance?
Between providers is not a migration I've done. So I've tended to go from a self-managed service to a fully managed service. So it very much depends on how you're sending out your configuration to your staff to use in their clients, how those clients are managed, so the client software, that is, and how your authentication method works. So if you're using client certificates to authenticate, maybe with a username and password on top, those certificates might need to be regenerated. The configurations might need to be sent out. If you've got 200 people and they're all using laptops that have been provided by the company they're working for, and all of that IT is managed, it becomes a little easier because all of the client software that they use to connect to the VPN is in the control of the IT team.
Yeah.
So rolling that out onto a laptop that's managed is much easier than an organization where you've got to bring your own device. Or in some cases, bring 2 devices, because why bring one device into work when you can have 2? Because there'll be different security networks and things like that. So I know some public sector organizations will have people who work in software and DevOps who have a bring your own device policy, but also a managed device as well. So they might have double whammy on VPNs. They might have 2 different ones.
Interesting.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah. I guess also on the back of that, and by the way, for anyone who does have a question, you know, feel free to kind of interrupt and unmute yourself if you wanted to do it that way, or indeed, you know, use the chat function. But off the back of that, does like the size of company, or you know, or potentially even a team, impact which choice of platform you actually go with?
I think this comes down to 2 things: how big you currently are, and therefore what the cost trade-offs are. A larger company might be more likely to have a dedicated DevOps team to manage this stuff, but also how much you're likely to grow or shrink as well has a big impact. So if you're a fixed size and you know you're okay, and you're a big number of people and you've got a dedicated team, you're in a pretty good scenario to consider a fixed solution. Anything other than that, then flexibility may well play a part. If you're scaling your stuff up and down from a VPN point of view, they still continue working for you. But it will, you know, that flexibility thing, it becomes an option then.
Okay, cool, interesting, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if anyone's got any other questions, you know, please do use the, like I said, either kind of unmute yourself and just go for it, or yeah, the chat function, obviously at the bottom. I think it's like in the middle to the right hand side of the bottom panel. Yeah, so feel free to pop anything there. But No, I think that was really interesting, Tess. Yeah, really interesting, and obviously very topical over the last kind of 18 months or so. And yeah, it's interesting for you saying that like last June that you were potentially looking at getting more people back in the office, and yeah, how that probably U-turned quite quickly, didn't it?
It's been very, very variable. The predictability of this kind of situation, not just obviously where the size of your organization now, but the idea that we can't predict, or certainly June last year, we couldn't predict when we'd be there, when we wouldn't be there. Now we're in a slightly more stable situation from the point of view of the health of the nation. But we're also in a very volatile situation from an employment point of view, because we have engineers who come along and say, I'm only going to take a fully remote role. So that has an impact on hiring. It has an impact on how you set up your company going forward, and how you kind of flex that. If anybody's interested, I do have a couple of slides, which is why I'm still sharing, to dig into how you monitor and look at predictability of that kind of thing. So we can either cover it there, or we can come back to it, or reach out to me in between. Elizabeth, you've got your hand up. Go for it.
Hi, Tess. I work at a law firm, and so of course a lot of the data that we handle is confidential and needs to stay that way. Do you think that can be reconciled with using the cloud? Is there some solution to that? Because I know that there's also concerns about if using a US provider, the Patriot Act. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but that's been mentioned a few times within the office.
One of the key things about a native solution is if the provider can allow you to restrict the region that you're setting this up in. So my work with HMRC, it has to be in UK. There is no excuses for this. It has to be in the UK. There's no way around it. So being able to say it must be in the London region is a big thing, and they should be able to give you that flexibility. So yeah, it's a consideration. The other consideration is if what you're securing with the VPN sits behind the VPN, and you've got all the extra authentication anyway to get at whatever documents, sensitive or otherwise, then it's an additional layer of security, but it shouldn't be a barrier to going for a native solution potentially. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're
welcome. Yeah, perfect. Well, yeah, if anyone has anything else, yeah, like I said, please feel free to kind of chime in now. Otherwise, yeah, Tess, did you have anything else you wanted to touch upon at the moment?
Can I have a big thumbs up of people who are interested in monitoring and predictability, size, scaling, that kind of thing? If people are interested, we can dig into it. Okay, I've had 1 thumbs up, 3 thumbs up.
Yeah.
4.
Awesome.
Okay. So here's one I prepared earlier, because monitoring and alerting is a bit of a joy for me. There's 2 types of techniques for this, but we're trying to answer the same problem, whether you're self-managed or whether you're native. The problem you're trying to solve is, how big a solution do I need to have? How many people has it got to handle? And are there going to be peaks and troughs? Is it going to switch off over the weekend? Am I going to be paying for a load of stuff I don't need? So one of the big challenges with self-managing is avoiding over-provisioning. So I know OpenVPN much more than I know anything else. So these are the examples from that. There's going to be equivalent ones for your own hand-cranked version. So understanding what your size of server is versus the number of connections you've got per server, how many it can handle, what the peak load is going to be. Is everyone going to log in for 9 o'clock for a stand-up and then log off again? There are some enterprise solutions that help you have a view of monitoring and have a view of traffic and things like that on OpenVPN, on the access server. That's going to be additional cost on top of your self-managed stuff. But you can actually roll your own, and there are open source plugins to help you. One of the most obvious and well-used ones is Marcus Furlong's OpenVPN Monitor. And that hooks into OpenVPN's management interface, gives you all sorts of things like the list of connected users, the peak usage, current data packets lost, all that kind of stuff. It does take some setting up and tweaking. Again, we're in the realms of doing your own hardening and security. So it is something to bear in mind. If you're really advanced and interested in all this stuff and you already are delving into this area, you can have something like CollectD or Prometheus node exporter on your servers. You can run Grafana somewhere. You can have all the dashboards and graphs you could possibly create. You might want to set up Sensu for alerts if you were already in that space. But it's very much your choice and what you are willing to support with this kind of thing. You have to crank your own, you have to crank your own alerts, you have to ship your own logs, things like that. In a native world, it becomes a lot more managed for you. You get gifts, you get bonuses. And this is partly where you spend the money with a native solution. So all the big three have solutions for predictability, for tracking analysis, and you don't have to have a big idea of where you want to scale to up front either. So because it's on demand, you can start without too much upfront analysis. So Azure Monitor's got built-in metrics, AWS the same. Everyone's got audit trails for changes in infrastructure and things like that as well. And Google has also previewed a analysis tool to look at your utilization of your tunnel. So you can actually decide when you want to scale, or how, if you need to connect to a different network, how you split that off and all that kind of stuff. If people are interested, we can look at the type of metrics that we can dive into, but we've got things like number of people connected, amount of data going past, amount of data lost and things falling off in connections, and why that might have happened. And that's quite difficult to dig into from your own point of view. Having that handed to you as a gift from the native suppliers is a really big thing. So that's kind of where I wanted to dive in with that. I don't know whether there's other questions. Can I get a thumbs up that people are grokking what I'm talking about? Is this all making sense, or I'm just waffling it into the void? Yay! Excellent. I am making sense, at least to at least 2 or 3 people. This is awesome.
We've got 5 thumbs up.
Yes, this is fantastic. Excellent. Yeah, if anyone's got any other things that they want to dig into or so on, you can reach me on Twitter. You can get hold of me on my Maytech email and things like that as well. And I'm on LinkedIn. Back to you if there's anything more you wanted to ask or add.
No, I think that's pretty much everything. Everything from me, Tess. Unless anyone else got any other questions, I think yeah, it's been really interesting, really insightful, and yeah, like I said, really topical. So yeah, thank you so much, Tess. Obviously, thank you for everyone joining us today. Yeah, it's been a really interesting talk. As always, obviously, it is a community-driven meetup. So we do always ask if anyone within today's talk, you've got friends, colleagues, ex-colleagues, whatever it might be, who'd be interested. We're always keen to put feelers out there, understand what topics people find interesting, and additionally people who would be interested in doing a talk. So yeah, there are certainly future speaking opportunities. But yeah, no, I guess a big thank you for everyone joining us today. Obviously, a big thank you to you as well, Tess, because I know it's no small effort that goes into doing such a good bit of content. So yeah, and it seems like everyone's using the chat function to yeah, to kind of say thank you. So excellent. Well, yeah, so thanks everyone for joining. Hope everyone enjoys the rest of today. I'll do a bit of follow-up for everyone in the kind of various groups, and yeah, look forward to hopefully seeing everyone again next month. And thank you, Tess.
Thanks,
Bye.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.